guys. I'm just going to hand out something. Maybe you can take and pass along. Oh, thank you. So this morning, we've got about an hour and a half together. So I don't have material that'll take an hour and a half. So hopefully this gives us some time to discuss questions, and if you want to raise concerns that have to do with the method of caring for people or counseling, this is an opportunity to do that. Just to make a couple of preliminary comments, what I'm trying to do this morning is refer back to that three trees diagram. Maybe we can pop that up on the screen if that's okay. You'll remember we looked at this the other day. This gives us a conceptual framework for understanding the different elements that are involved when we're trying to facilitate or see renewal happen in our lives or the lives of someone else. And we have actually built our pastoral method around that as well, just to simplify everything. So if those are the elements that you need to be aware of, then when it comes to actually helping someone, you are going to need some skills related to each of those areas in order to make sure that you're covering the big picture of someone's life when you're actually helping them. Before we dive in, just one other comment. We're obviously talking here about kind of some skills and some principles, but obviously it goes without saying that the most fundamental thing you need is to love someone. You know, you can be good at techniques, but if you don't love them, then it doesn't really matter how good you are. They're going to feel unloved because they are being unloved if you don't love them. So I think it's just helpful to remember that in ministry, we're not just sort of professionals who are highly skilled. We are loving God, and we're loving people, and we are trying to reflect something of God's care for the people in front of us. And to be honest, if you love someone well, but your skills are not that great, God will still use you to get a lot done. So just to really emphasize that character matters enormously in ministry and in counseling in particular. So just thought I'd preface that before we jump into some of the skills. Sorry, I just realized I handed out my notes when I handed out. I think they're in the back there. Yeah. Thanks. Okay, so let's go back to that diagram then. And you'll remember that the four elements are heat, thorns, cross, and fruit. Just a quick recap. Does anyone know what those four elements refer to? The top of your head? Yeah? The heat is stuff outside of you. Your life situation, hey? Yeah, outside of your soul. So your heat could include like your body. So that's the slight nuance here. But it's outside of your soul in that sense. It's outside of your heart. Yeah. What do thorns refer to? Traffic. Well, actually, traffic is part of heat. Hey, yeah.
How you react to the counter response,
Yeah. You're raging at traffic are the thorns. Our ungodly responses, yeah. Vice is a nice word because it captures sometimes the habituated nature of those ungodly responses. So thorns can be sort of habitual ungodly responses. Every time there's traffic, I have rage, and it becomes a habit. Thorns, remember, come out of the heart. So we want to identify the thorns, but we want to go deeper and think about what is happening in the heart. What does the cross refer to? God, yeah. Yeah, God, who God is for us in Christ, all the spiritual resources we have in the gospel. And then fruit godly responses, hey. So godly reactions, godly behaviors, and again, kind of habitual, often patterns of godly behaviors is really what we're looking for in people. And of course, those come from our hearts as well, hey. As the Holy Spirit renews us, He produces His fruit in our lives. Okay, so those are the elements involved. And what I want to do now is just think through what are the skills you need if you're going to help someone go through that process. And the first one is that you want to know the heat. So you want to know the heat in a person's life. As we walk through this, I'm going to touch on a couple of things on this, but I'm going to give you much more than is on here. I've just given you this as a bit of a kind of reminder of some of the key ones. But the key, other key principles around knowing the heating are on this slide. So the first thing you want to do is ask good questions. It seems really obvious, but if you want to get to know someone's life situation, you need to ask them about it. So you need to ask them questions about what's going on, about what's happening in their situation, about who they are. Paul Tripp says the following: "It's tempting to think that insightful people have all the right answers. In one sense, that is true. But it's also true that you don't get to the right answers without first asking the right questions. The engineer who changes the face of technology is able to do so because he first stepped back and asked questions that no one else was asking. Our thinking always rides on the rails of our questions. Good thinkers walk around a topic and look at it from different angles. They ask new questions, and they ask old questions in new ways. Good thinkers don't make uncorroborated assumptions, and they don't allow themselves to think that they know more than they actually do." One of the big dangers, I think, in helping people is we think we know them better than we do. Especially if they've been coming to your church for a year or two, you've seen them a few times, you've maybe had a coffee with them, you know their name, you know about their family a little bit. The reality is we often don't know people. And so we need to ask questions. I think especially for, the more of a kind of senior leadership role you have, people may email you for a coffee and they're presenting an issue. And of course, we want to kind of go right in there with our theological solutions. It's helpful sometimes to pause and think, maybe I should ask a few more questions before I go in with all of my theological insight. Let me just ask a few more questions to make sure I'm really understanding all the nuances and the details of this. Does that make sense? So we can make uncorroborated assumptions easily. The way I kind of think of this is when you think you know something, you often end up kind of making mistakes and getting a little bit hurt. So sometimes at night, you're a bit thirsty, you want to get water from the kitchen, so you walk around, and you don't want to turn any lights on in your flat or apartment or your house or something, because, then you wake up. So you try and get to the kitchen without turning anything on. And I know, my kids left something out in the lounge, and then there's the drying rack with the clothes on it somewhere in the lounge. And I think, I'm pretty sure I can navigate this. But because I'm making an assumption that I know my way around, when I bump into something and knock it over at 2 o'clock in the morning, I get even more frustrated because I think, I didn't know that it moved, or I didn't know that that person had put that there. And sometimes pastorally, that's what happens. We sort of think we know what's going on, and then we step on something, and we've actually offended that person, or we've actually missed the real problem because we made an assumption. We thought we knew it. We thought we were kind of familiar with them. But we made an assumption, and we ended up misdiagnosing the real problem. So we gave them theological information that wasn't relevant. Now just think about that for a second. Has someone, when you've had a struggle, has someone ever given you theological information that was true but not relevant? What did it feel like? Yeah. It felt a little bit maybe condescending. Yeah, they didn't really get it. Would you want to go back to them? No. You're like, well, that was a waste of time. So we've got to be so careful, hey, because we're busy, we've got a lot going on, people are maybe coming to us with problems, and we've got to, we want to kind of sort it out and move on. If we give people theological information that is true but not relevant, it's going to undermine our relationship with them. And it's not going to really help them. And they'll walk away going, oh, I kind of knew that anyways. It's not really why I came. So it's always good to slow down and ask. If you don't know for sure, ask. And one of the ways to kind of test your to test your knowledge, is to kind of play it back to them. We'll touch on that in a second. Before we do that, though, let me just give you two types of questions that you can use. Open-ended questions. You're probably familiar with those. Does anyone know what an open-ended question is? Yeah, you're giving them an opportunity to kind of take it in a direction they want to go in. So, yeah. Mm. Yeah. It invites self-disclosure. So it invites the person to open up. And especially early on, that's what you want to be doing. You want to give them opportunities to open up and express what's on their hearts. The second kind of question that can be helpful is broad questions. So typically, I want to try and understand the big picture of a person's life so that when we talk about a particular struggle, I know the context. So if they're having particular problems in one particular relationship, it'd be helpful to know about their relationships in general. Because maybe this problem with this particular relationship is not the first time they've had this kind of problem in their relationships, hey? So you want to look for the patterns, you want to look for the kind of big picture, the broad kind of questions. So broad questions kind of scan a person's life to reveal the big picture, the themes, the patterns. So it might be a little bit like, tell me about the different relationships in your life. What are they like? What are kind of the joys and the sorrows in your life? I want to try and get big picture stuff. So the image here that I think of is a funnel. Funnel is kind of broad at the top, and then eventually it kind of narrows down. And so in a pastoral conversation, that's what I want to do, is try and get a bit of a kind of big picture of a person's life, a sense of the larger story, so that when we come down to that particular issue, I have a sense of context of who they are and kind of what's going on with them, how they tend to process life, how they tend to think, what their values are, what their view of God is like, what their conversion story was like. Are they genuinely a Christian? All kinds of questions like that. Proverbs chapter 18, verse 15 says, "The heart of the discerning acquires knowledge, for the ears of the wise seek it out." So discerning people become discerning partly by acquiring knowledge. They want to understand what's really going on. They don't allow themselves to assume that they know more than they actually do. Proverbs 18:17 says, "In a lawsuit, the first to speak seems right until someone comes forward and cross-examines." Have you ever had a situation like that? Maybe it's a marriage situation or family counseling situation. The one person kind of comes in and you think, man, this person is being so unjustly treated. And then you speak to the spouse and you go, oh, okay, it's not quite that simple. And so we want to just be kind of careful and think, okay, I need to make sure that I've understood all the relevant details. So I need to ask. I need to keep asking. There's a little bit of an analogy here, I think, with preparing a sermon. I'm preaching this Sunday on the second commandment, and I thought I knew it. And then earlier this week, I was kind of looking at it and looking at the grammar of it, and I realized I didn't really understand some of the dynamics going on in the second commandment. And it would be so easy to have just thought, I'm familiar with this, I basically know what it means, let me just get on with putting my sermon together. But actually, because of kind of slowing down and going, actually, how does this all fit together? That's really going to shape, hopefully, a more faithful sermon in the end. And I think with helping people, because we're busy, we're tired, we've got a lot going on, we're vulnerable to rushing. And then we miss very important details. And this is particularly true, I think, in a few areas. One of them is the area of emotional abuse, for example, in marriage. Some things like emotional abuse can be quite subtle. And if you don't take your time to ask questions, you can miss something. And you can end up giving advice that actually makes the situation worse. Because the abuser knows how to use truth to get what he wants. So it's very important sometimes just to be able to slow down and go, do I know everything I need to know? Have I asked enough questions? Okay, so if we want to know the heat, then we need to ask. It's fairly simple, hey, but it's the things, sometimes the simple things we need to get better at. If we want to know the heat, secondly, then having asked questions, we need to listen. We need to get really, really good at listening. Again, Paul Tripp says the following: for personal ministry to be effective, the principle is simple. Don't assume, ask, and then listen. If you think you can take something for granted, ask anyways. Only then will you be sure that the help you offer will fit the situation. A couple of tips on listening. I will give you a couple, and I can actually send my notes to Dave, and maybe he can disseminate them to you. Listen lovingly. We're not listening to people the way a lawyer listens to someone he's cross-examining. We're listening to people the way a parent listens to their child, or the way friends listen to each other, or siblings, or, you're listening as a way of loving them, to understand them, to know them, to care for them. Listening can actually be inherently empathetic, hey? I'm not sure if you've been in a conversation recently where someone really listened to you. What did it feel like? Can you remember? Have you had that experience recently? Yeah. Feel heard, feel significant, feel like a real human being. One of the most dehumanizing things that can happen to us is people don't see us, they don't listen to us, they don't recognize us. And so listening to someone can be inherently empathetic and empowering and even kind of therapeutic in some ways, just listening to them. So we want to listen lovingly. We want to listen long. Often, I need to listen for longer than I think I need to. And the longer I listen, the more I realize my original assumptions were a little bit off. And I think, I'm so glad I asked a question instead of launching in with my theological solution, because actually I would have been off. And so we may need to listen for longer than we feel inclined to. We need to be patient, and we really need to hear the full story. Listen reflectively. This actually does appear on your little cheat sheet. This is a way of summarizing and reflecting what you hear to the person. This also kind of can be inherently empathetic. It can build relationship. But it also really confirms that you've accurately understood what it is the person's saying. Right? So sometimes I'll say to someone, it sounds like you're saying X, Y, Z. Is that right? So that's actually a closed-ended question. Closed-ended questions are great for getting a yes or no answer. Sometimes you actually might want a yes or no answer. So reflective listening is a way of just ensuring that you've accurately understood. The benefit of that is you're not launching in with a solution, because even if you're a little bit off, once you share your reflection, it'll be corrected or it'll be refined. And it just allows you to kind of get a more accurate understanding of the real crux of the issue. The other thing, other kind of tip on listening also here is interpretive listening. So listen interpretively in the sense that you want to discern unstated thoughts or emotions. So the person might be talking about a kind of a problem, a practical problem. But the way they talk about it could reveal a lot of anger or a lot of fear or a lot of shame. And interpretive listening helps you try and discern what's going on under the surface, what might be happening not just in the heat, but in their hearts. And so we want to kind of listen interpretively and think, what is their body language telling me? What is their tone of voice telling me? What is their non-verbal communication telling me? I think sometimes when guys get married, they realize this is quite an important skill to develop, because maybe something goes wrong, they're a little bit insensitive or unthoughtful, and then they say to their wives, hey, is everything okay? And then their wife might say, it's fine. Oh, cool, okay, I was just checking. That's where you need interpretive listening. You need to discern, yeah.
The problem is our wives listen very interpretively.
Yeah.
And recent studies has found that only 7% of what our wives hear is actually what we are saying. 38% of it is how we are saying that, and 55% is how we look when we say it.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, so if we're going to be good listeners, we are going to take all of that into account, hey? And again, I think the busyness of ministry mitigates against this, hey? Because you've got a lot going on. And it's like, okay, just tell me what the problem is so that I can fix it. That's not how this works. And when someone does it to you, you know how frustrating it is. Okay. So we want to get really good at listening.
So I think my big question would be, what are you doing, maybe through your own body language? So for an example, maybe I'm speaking to somebody and they're sharing their heart, and you don't want to be quiet for too long. And you like, tell me more. So I'm like, that voice is sounding good. Sometimes it doesn't work.
Yeah.
People think I'm rushing them. But I'm like, but then also your body language. So from like sitting like this, from like that, it makes them not want to speak. But you listening, sometimes you're not even aware of the restriction that it's bringing them.
Yeah.
Can you touch on
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, and it's nice to actually ask these questions as they come along. Yeah, I think we need to be self-aware in terms of how we're coming across to people. If we're checking our phone while someone's talking to us, and we say, no, I'm listening, just keep talking. that communicates. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So putting it away. Yeah, putting away, it's good. I think generally like kind of an open posture, an open stance. Yeah, so there's quite, there is quite a bit of material. People talk about some postures that are helpful. So being open, focusing on the person. I'm not overly persuaded that you need to have any particular thing. I think the big thing is listening well, treating them well, giving them dignity, not rushing them. Yeah, so in some ways I would say it's that thing of really loving them, having time for them. And that's often a reflection of what's going on with us. Sometimes I'm just busy and I want to get this done. But people aren't like that, hey? So, yeah, I think I've got a little thing I could also maybe send to this, a little acronym around some tips around posture and that kind of thing. But the more focused and also just being yourself, I think, is fine. And reading the person. Some people aren't different, and so I'm going to try and be sensitive to where they're at. But I don't want to overly think through my technique. For me, often, I want to think through, do I understand this person? Do I see them? Do I recognize that God loves them? So the way I think of this is often much more of a heart issue but I think open posture, phone away, making eye contact. I think there's little prompts, even like you're doing now, is good. Some people can get overly, some people don't always like that, but if it's who you are, then I think it's fine, yeah. So I would say be yourself, but really love them. Yeah, 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 yeah. Yes, yeah, yeah, yeah. And that's why I'm not overly into, because there's been a lot of like stuff that Western psychologists have produced around how to do it, but that changes from culture to culture. So I think, am I loving this person? Am I honoring them? Which may mean I'm adapting a little bit to who they are, and I think that's just an expression of love. Hey, cool. Just the other kind of thing around listening is obviously, while we're listening, we're also responding, even if it's in very subtle ways. And it's helpful, I think, when someone is really sharing something personal, to respond appropriately, just to respond with empathy. I think we notice, like, sometimes you've kind of poured your heart out a little bit you've exposed a little bit of your heart to someone, and they just seem cold to it, and they kind of like, okay, cool, thanks. you gotta think, okay, cool. So again, you don't want to overdo it. You want to still be yourself and whatever, but I think just we want to respond appropriately to what's being shared with us. If we can see, man, this person really went out on a limb to share this with me, I want to acknowledge that, thank them for it, honor them. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. Mm. Yeah, 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 yeah. So that's a great question. I kind of started with mentioning we're not just talking about techniques today. Our character comes out in how we relate to each other. Yeah, I think it is something we should all grow in. So I don't think it's something that we should say, well, it's just who I am. We can all become more patient. So I think the things I would encourage you to do with the people in your life right now is to be intentional about asking questions and listening. So, for example, I think we often ask questions to respond, rather ask questions to understand. So, I'm sure you've done this, I've done this, and you see it happening all the time. Someone asks someone a question, they respond briefly, and then that reminds the person who asked the question about a story or a movie, and then they start going, oh, and they haven't actually even allowed that person to finish speaking. They've just asked a question in order to respond. Rather, try and ask questions in order to understand. So if you're married or you've got kids or you've got a friend, you say, hey, how was your week? Listen to understand. It doesn't have to become sort of overly counselly. It's just patiently asking questions so that you understand, how was their week? What was it really like? We'll come to this now when we talk about entry gates. But I'm not just listening for the facts. I'm listening for how they have experienced those facts. So, if I ask my wife, how was your day? And she says, I did this, and I did this, and I did this. I'm not just looking for factual data. I'm looking for, okay, so when you saw her and you had that chat, what was going on? How did you feel about it? I'm trying to understand her experience of her day. Otherwise, she could just WhatsApp me a list of things she did. I want to know what her day felt like, what it was like for her to be her that day. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so again, you don't need to make it overly weird for the person, but it's actually just being patient and really listen. Because people are sending you messages all the time. And when you don't pick up on them and indicate to them that you've received that message, they often will just leave it. So we have relationships kind of at this level when we could be having relationships at this level. They don't need to be like, it's not like every conversation needs to be super deep. But I just think our average conversations are probably a little bit more superficial because we are not listening to understand. We're often listening just to respond. Great, yeah. Mm. 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 Yeah. Mm. 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 Yeah. Yeah. So that's what I'd call a deep question. We'll come to deep questions, but yeah, so a deep question Open-ended broad questions are typically more around finding out what's happening in the heat. Like, what's going on? Do I know everything I need to know? The deeper question is, how are you experiencing that? And they link with the entry gate issue. So the entry gate, again, this comes from Paul Tripp. He's got a book called Instruments in the Redeemer's Hands. If you'll read one book on counseling methodology, that would probably be my recommendation. It's a bit long, but it's very good. Instruments in the Redeemer's Hands by Paul Tripp. And actually, a lot of our stuff we've kind of nicked from Paul Tripp. So he defines an entry gate not as the problem, so it's not the heat, but it's the person's experience of the problem. It's more the heart. So the entry gate is a particular person's experience of the situation, or a particular person's experience of the problem. You're trying to find out, what is this person struggling with in the midst of this? So it's what Richard is saying. It's kind of going more to, what story are they telling themselves about what's going on? How are they interpreting this event? So I think on Wednesday I mentioned, when I was young, my parents got divorced, and I've got brothers, and we all would have had a slightly different interpretation of that event. So the entry gate would have been different for each of us, even though the heat was the same. So we want to identify the person's experience of that situation, and then we want to connect with them there, not just at the problem level. It's helpful to do that early on, because it builds trust. It shows them that you get it. They feel like, oh, you've actually understood what is gripping my heart right now. I mean, they may not articulate it that way, but they will intuitively sense you understand them if you're able to identify their entry gate.
So take an example of a divorce.
Mm.
It could be, is that what the entry gate, would it be for one son to be rejection, feeling the feeling of being rejected?
Yeah.
That's what he experienced. And for the other son, it might be that in that moment he felt that that's actually he's to blame.
Yeah.
You know, it's because I was nasty to my mom, and she's now divorcing his dad.
Yeah. So it could be sadness around rejection, or it could be guilt because maybe I'm the reason this has happened. Or it could be maybe anger. They're both doing something wrong. Why are they doing this? So the experience of the problem is going to be unique to a particular person. So the entry gate is going to be different. And we want to make sure that we're understanding, what is that entry gate for this person. And so again, that's why, how do you find an entry gate? Well, reflective listening helps you get there. Interpretive listening, as they talk about it, you're going to try and discern some of those unstated emotions or thoughts. You're going to kind of check in to understand if you've clarified it. So again, we get to the entry gate just by asking and listening. Having identified the entry gate, we want to then kind of help them connect with God. So we'll kind of talk about this more around the speaking component. But we might just want to share a promise or paraphrase something from Scripture to comfort them, to help them, to connect with where they're at right now. So if the person's just feeling absolutely isolated from God, they feel like they're all alone, we might want to remind them, hey, in Psalm 34, God says he is near to the brokenhearted. And I want you to know that God is close to you right now. It doesn't feel like that, but God promises that he draws near to those that are brokenhearted. I'd like to pray with you now and ask that God would comfort you by his Spirit. So you're just trying to, here's the thing. You need to identify the entry gate accurately in order to know which part of the Bible is most relevant. Because if the person isn't feeling isolated and alone, but they're feeling guilty, then there's going to be a different theological truth. Hey, different diagnosis requires different medicine. Yeah. Mm. Yeah, 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 yeah. And the nice thing is just taking your time, because otherwise it's always going to be the same. It's like no matter what my problem is Jeremiah 29:11. Like, you know, and that's just not going to fit for the person at some point. The other thing that's helpful about taking your time, and we can also reflect upon this more around the heart, is even as the person's struggling, I don't always know my entry. Like, I don't always know exactly what I'm struggling with. I know I'm not happy, but I'm not sure why. And if someone is going to give me some time and they're going to reflect with me, then together we might actually figure out where I'm at. But if they launch into something too quickly, I'm just going to feel like there's no point in sharing that because I know Jeremiah 29:11. You know, I already knew that verse. And it's just if they share it and it doesn't fit, it just often leaves us feeling a bit cold. Which then you can feel a bit guilty about because it's like, I know it should comfort me because it's from the Bible. But it doesn't feel like it matches my need right now.
Sorry, a bit more general question. When counseling, how much of it should be gifting? So, for instance, if I'm to church, my role there is teacher,
Mm,
teacher,
mm,
and there's someone who's counseling that thing. Would it be considered as being unloving or uncaring if my knee-jerk reaction is me counseling person, go there, don't talk to me, that's not my gifting? Or is it like you were saying, I just as a pastor need to work on my patience and counseling ability and all that, even though it's not a big strength of mine, just being too late.
What do you think the answer is?
I would go with the gift or gifting. That would be me, but I don't know if that's
Yeah.
always.
Well, the way I think of it is, I'm not sure if I mentioned this on Wednesday, but I think the way I conceptualize the leadership role is that every leader is a shepherd leader. So at some level, I think every leader should be able to shepherd one of the sheep. That doesn't mean that every leader is a counselor, but I think it's really going to strengthen your leadership and it will even strengthen your preaching if you are able to walk with people a bit. So I'm often, at Jubilee, all of the guys and women on staff are, everyone's busy and they've got kind of their portfolios, but I'm often just trying to get people to do a little bit of counseling. Just meet with this person for a little bit, or try and walk with this person a bit before you refer them on. Maybe have 1 or 2 meetings with them, and just kind of it'll strengthen your leadership. You will understand people better. It'll enrich your preaching. So I think there's a place for gifting and delegation, but because God calls us to be shepherds who care for the flock, I think it'll greatly enrich anyone, even the senior minister, to be doing a little bit of care and counseling. Yeah.
Recently, saw actually, I think even with Doug Powell's seminar yesterday, it's like if we take discipleship seriously, we should look at the way Jesus did it. And he never said, actually, money issues, go to Judas and speak to really the guy today with you're struggling now. Jesus
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Like you are not
yeah,
equipped, you
yeah,
have no idea,
yeah,
and you trying might actually damage them more than.
yeah,
But I do understand, of course, you have your story,
yeah,
you understand the situation, and if you're just out of your depth,
yeah,
better to get someone else in who can assist with,
yeah.
you know,
Great.
at
Yeah,
this point.
I completely agree.
And that's my default setting with women personally.
Yeah.
Mm,
I'll listen to a lady, but I'll
mm,
usually very, very within that conversation say, but there's great ladies in our church that would be able to assist you with
mm,
this.
mm.
Even with that, I would get a lady to sit in with me on the conversation because three-quarters of the things I just have no idea. Can't speak on you with depth to a lot of stuff. So I think, yeah.
Yeah. Let me just give you one question you can use to help identify the entry gate. What's the hardest part about this for you? So they've told you the heat, right? And actually someone was doing this for me recently, which was great. I was kind of in a little context.
Is that one of the questions to get into entry?
Yeah, yeah. What is the hardest part about this situation for you? So kind of what are you struggling with the most in the middle of this? So let me give you an example. My brother recently immigrated, and I was in a kind of small group context. We had our redemption group retreat. So it was really great because all the leaders got to receive counseling and give counseling. And so I was sharing, my heat was that situation. And he's got little girls, and I've got little girls, and they're really close, and now they're not going to see each other for a long, long time. But I wasn't sure why I was so upset about everything. So I'm kind of talking about it, I'm getting a bit upset, and people are listening interpretively and reflectively and asking me questions like, so what is so hard about this? And I wasn't that sure, but as they were kind of asking and listening, I was able to figure out why that was so tough or why that was so hard, or like what exactly was the crux of the issue, what particularly was making it difficult. You see, often people don't know exactly why they're upset. I'm not sure if that ever happens to you. You're grumpy, you're angry, right? You don't know why. You're like, do I just need to eat? What is it? And maybe sometimes it just is that. But it could be something like someone's spoken to you in a certain way, or something's happened, but you're not 100% sure why you're so frustrated. And so if you can have access to someone who will listen and ask good questions, you've got a better chance of understanding what's happening. When you identify entry gates and connect with the person through those entry gates, you build trust, you boost hope, and you secure a commitment to engaging, hey? Because they'll walk away going, wow, that person really got me. I think I'd be willing to have another coffee with them. And I know we're all busy and we think, oh, I don't want to have more coffees with people. But the worst thing that could happen is someone walks away and thinks, I never want to speak to a pastor again. So
What happens when corporate is going? Do you think there's an element of like, you were saying like you're running some 3-year course and stuff like that. So going from your comments in the beginning and stuff like you were saying like at the end of the day you've got to love God, you've got to love people. Is there an element of kind of training people in counseling, but I'd imagine that there's a part of discipling people to the place of you've got to love God and you've got to love people. So I'm thinking like in our context of like training people in maybe that space where they actually just don't have the heart to love people, if that makes sense. Do you think there's an extent to which you can train people to counsel at the risk of them not maybe having the heart to just love people? And maybe it's just maybe maturity, you're not there yet, or whatever it might be.
yeah.
It's kind of a question of how much of it can be taught, or how much of it can be taught or maturity. So what are you going to say?
Yeah, so we use an approach a kind of four-dimensional approach, basically. So part of it is content, and yeah, a lot of people can get the content. Part of it is character, and if the character isn't there, you're not going to be very effective. Part of it is competence, the actual skill set, and then also being in community. That's the kind of fourth component. And so in the training process, we're trying to build community with the trainees so we get a sense of where they're at and how they're dealing with life and their love for God and their love for others. I think we have to have all of those in mind if we're training people. Because it really isn't just about techniques. It really is about loving people. So I think everyone can take a step forward, but at some point, either because of character or competence, you may want to say to someone, actually, I'm not sure if you're ready to join this team or whatever. So, yeah.
What if you ask an entry question that scares the person and brings them to the realization of, oh snap, I've got to be there.
You've got to?
I've got to open up.
Yeah.
There's actually more to it.
Yeah.
And then they're like, no, you know what, actually, nothing,
Mm.
but you can just, so what happens, is there ever times when you try and you probe and you're like, this journey
Mm.
is not going anywhere because the person does not want to.
Mm. Yeah, that does happen. That's a good insight.
How do you handle that situation? Because they know the issue, but for them, they're probably finding solace in the fact that they're speaking to the pastor.
Yeah.
So they're like, yeah, I spoke to my pastor. They're like, they don't want to.
Yeah.
How do you?
Yeah. That's a really good insight. That does happen. So let me answer it by switching into our next section, because we're going to talk about moving from knowing the heat to understanding the heart. And this connects a little bit with deep questions and what we also call progressive questions. So if we can switch to understanding the heart, let me just touch on progressive questions. What I mean by progressive questions is someone comes to share with you, they give you some information, and you use that information to ask another question. So they'll maybe say, I've made a terrible mistake. Okay. What happened? What was that mistake? And they give you a little bit of information at a time. And so you just keep a progressive line of questioning is just to use the next bit of information to help you ask another question. At some point, they may actually block you. And you can tell because the answer will be very vague. Trying to think. There's actually a verse for this. Proverbs 18, verse 4. This is a great little proverb. The words of the mouth are deep waters, but the fountain of wisdom is a rushing stream. Okay, it's a bit obtuse, but here's what I think Solomon is trying to say. And you can see this actually in some other translations. This is the NIV. It's not quite as clear, but the words of a person's mouth are deep waters. You can't see to the bottom of them, of deep waters. If you go out on a boat onto the sea, and you look into the water, you just see blue or whatever. You can't see to the ocean floor. It's hidden. And what Solomon is saying, I think, is that generally in our communication, people have hidden motives. They use language to disguise what's going on. They may not even realize they're doing it. They don't say certain things. They cast things in a particular light. The contrast is that the fountain of wisdom, wise communication, is a stream. A stream is transparent, right? If you see a stream, you can see the pebbles at the bottom of the stream. So when someone's words are evasive or vague or a little bit murky, then I think something's going on here. They don't want to tell me something. And I might prod a little bit, or it might be like if their heart is like a car and this door is locked. I'm going to try this door, go around. And, gently, I'm just seeing, is there a way in here? And actually, if it's closed, then yeah, bash the window. I'm generally, unless it's, depending on how serious the issue is, sometimes people just actually haven't built up a level of trust with me. And then I'll think, hey, that's okay. I'm not in a rush. I'll have coffee with him next week or whatever, and we'll take it from there. And maybe one of the doors will be unlocked this time.
So, are you saying there's never a situation, and of course the answer is yes, unless I'm in some emergency, there's never a situation where you should force an answer out of someone?
It depends. I think if there's really dangerous behavior going on, or something that's quite, very sinful that needs to get addressed, then I will. And the way I'll do it, let me actually, if we can go to the next slide, sidebar. When treading into difficult terrain, I tend to use the helpful self-disclosure approach. Here's what I mean. On the back of this page, we tend to use, we encourage our leaders at Jubilee to use this when they want to confront someone. I'm not sure people always do, but instead of saying, "You're hiding information from me," which can be interpreted as accusatory, and you could say, so for example, you could say, I feel unclear about the situation when you don't give me all the details, because I don't feel like I have all the information I need. I would like you to give me some more specific details, because I want to care for you more effectively. What do you think? So that's a way of just kind of, you're confronting the problem, but you're not like blaming them. And again, because our hearts are, our motives and thoughts are often hidden even to ourselves, they may not even know why they are being evasive. Do you know what I mean? Often we are, you know this, sometimes someone asks you questions and I'm like, I know I'm being a little bit evasive. I don't know why I'm being like that. So it can easily become very confrontational. It's like, you're not telling me something. This is a slightly gentler way to get at that issue. So with more difficult things, I would probe, and if it's not a big deal, I'll come back to it later on. But if it's more serious, and I think actually I need to deal with it, then I'll go this route and try and get at it that way. Okay, so understanding the heart, if we can just go back to that slide. Again, we want to seek to understand. That's the proverb. The ear of the wise seeks understanding. Ways to do that is to ask deep questions. And deep questions are those questions that go, they're not about heat. They're about heart. So heat questions, deep questions, are getting at issues of motivation. Why are people doing what they're doing? How are people thinking? What are they feeling? What are they choosing? What are they desiring? What are they seeking? What are they trusting in? What are they hoping for? So all those, the functions of the heart, if you do a Bible study, a word study on the heart and what the heart does, the heart thinks, the heart feels, the heart chooses, the heart desires, the heart hopes, the heart trusts, the heart fears, the heart craves. I want to ask questions that get at the heart, that try and unpack what's going on in the heart. Another helpful little proverb here. Proverbs has got so much on communication. It's really, we commend it. Proverbs 20 verse 5. The purposes of a person's heart are deep waters. So again, it's a similar analogy of deep waters. And the word purposes there could also be translated motives or intentions. And what Solomon is saying is that what's going on in a person's heart is like what's going on at the bottom of the sea. You don't know. But one who has insight draws them out. So the wise person is able to kind of fish out the hidden thoughts and motives of the heart. And the way they do that is by asking good questions. So deep questions deliberately probe deeper. They go under the surface. They try and get at human motivation. Why is this person behaving this way? Why are they thinking this way? There's a really helpful article called X-Ray Questions, The Whys and Wherefores of Human Behavior by David Powlison. You can get it online, I think. You can either, it might be freely available online, or you can buy it for like $2 on the CCEF website, and it might be a good resource for your church to have. So it's a great article. He talks about human motivation, and he talks about questions you can use that help you get at it. And what's particularly helpful really is that he's trying to help you think about this issue. So he gives you like 30 questions, but he's really training you to think about what those questions are doing, and kind of what they're trying to get at. Can anyone think of some deep questions that you might ask someone if they've just shared the heat? They've just kind of shared, let's say they've shared about the heat of their marriage. They're going through some marriage difficulties. They've given you all the facts, but you want to know what's going on in their hearts. Can you think of some deep questions you might ask a husband who is navigating a difficult marriage? You could, but for a guy that may not work very well. Yeah.
How does that make you feel?
Yeah, so that's a good open-ended question, but it's going to give you factual information. Hey, because he'll say 5 years. Good information, we need to know that information. But he's not revealing his heart. Can you think of a deep question that would give you an insight into his heart? Okay. What kind of answer do you think you're going to get? So you're asking him, what kind of impact do you think you've had on your wife? Something like that? What kind of answer are you going to get? Hmm. Hmm. And there might be a time and a place where we do want to go with that approach, but it's not going to reveal his heart as much. It will a little bit, but one of the things we're trying to do with deep questions is see what is going on in this guy's heart right now, like at the moment.
Why do you think your wife is experiencing you like that? So that she would probably say, you always
Mm.
work, always at work, or you never work out. And maybe if you ask him, why do you think she's experiencing like that?
Mm. So again, that could be a good question to use, but the answer you're going to get is information about her heart, or what he thinks her heart is. Well, she just does that because she's super critical, and nothing can please her. That's why she does that. Which does, I mean, that answer does reveal his heart a little bit. But we're trying to get at questions that are going to actually help you get in there for him.
Maybe asking how is this, or how has this affected your day-to-day, like your
Mm-hmm.
day-to-day life?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think 3/4 of the time as guys, we don't know what's going on in our heart.
Mm.
But if you see how that outworks, then we can then
Yeah.
draw a line.
Yeah. So that's good, because what you're doing there is you've got progressive questioning in your mind. And you're thinking, okay, well, let me, like, especially if he doesn't really know what's going on, maybe if he can first identify how this is impacting his day-to-day living, you can then work backwards. But that question in and of itself is going to give you heat answers. Do you know what I mean? I mean, you can use it, and sometimes it's a good place to start because it's not as threatening, and you can kind of reverse engineer it.
Question would be, talking about incident X, whatever. What was the first thing that went through your mind when you experienced that?
Yeah,
The surface
Yeah.
thing that moved it from the heat to
Yeah.
internal thing.
yeah,
And how did you process that? What did you do with that?
yeah. So if she spoke to him badly, if he tells you, like, she did this, whatever, what was the first thing that went through your mind? Or what do you think about what's going on? You see, even that is just getting at his thoughts, and the heart thinks. So we want to get at thoughts, we want to get at emotions, we want to get at motives. So what would you like your marriage to be like? You can do that, and that's a good question. The challenge a little bit is he may not know quite why, and it's a little bit confrontational. Now, not to say you shouldn't use it, but sometimes I might start with so he reacted badly, so I could just start off, why did you react that way? But you could kind of get there a little bit more slowly by saying, when she did that, what were you thinking?
So what about questions like trying to get him to explore what expectations he might put on his life?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
what do you expect from your life
Mm.
in certain situations?
Yeah. And remember, expectations that's great. So getting at his expectations for his marriage, because remember, expectations are code for desires. This is what I want. And if my wife doesn't give this to me, James chapter 4, hey, I want something. I'm not getting it. I'm getting angry.
Maybe following up with okay, why do you want that?
Yeah,
And then that might
yeah.
process.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, so there's lots of different ways of getting at it. The thing we've got to try and do is just make sure, are we getting at the heart? Are we understanding his heart? James says we fight and quarrel because we've got passions that are at war within us. And in a good gospel conversation, you want to figure out what are the passions for this particular person? What are their desires? What lies are they believing? All those kinds of things. So are we getting at are we kind of getting at the heart enough? Does that make sense? It would be good to reflect on that. I think just as a personal homework thing, you could kind of think, okay, well, maybe actually I need to kind of consider deep questions a little bit more, and think of what they might involve, because you want to have a few of them up your sleeve, not just how do you feel about that or how do you think, because it'll come across as a little bit rote. So there are a whole variety of deep questions, but the point is that they're trying to unpack human motivation. They're trying to get at the heart, how people think, how people feel, what people desire, what it is they're longing for and seeking and trusting in. Okay, we've got to move on a little bit to speaking the cross. Speaking the cross. Obviously, what's happening here, one of the big things is that you're trying to discern underlying spiritual dynamics. So are we actually getting at the real thing? Are we, at this stage, have I understood not just the heat, but have I understood the heart? Have I understood which idols this person is kind of enamored with? Have I understood how they're thinking? Have I understood their behavior? Have I really understood them? And once I've done that, and of course it never really kind of ends, we're constantly growing in our knowledge of the person, but once I've discerned those underlying spiritual dynamics, then the key thing I want to do is minister the word to them, or minister the gospel to them. And what I mean by this is, there's a difference between ministering the gospel, or ministering God's word, and dispensing it. Okay, so you dispense like vitamins to someone. If you go to the pharmacy, they'll say, hey, take 2 of these, see how you feel. And sometimes we can do that with the Bible. We can say, hey, here's your problem, here's a little verse, try it on for size. Yeah. 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 It doesn't get at the heart, and it often doesn't even fit the situation. So what I mean by ministering the word is that, remember, you've understood the entry gate. You've connected with their experience. Having done that, you then personalize a truth from the Bible for them. Now, there's lots of different ways you could do that. You could say, hey, after having engaged with them around their experience of the problem, you could look at a passage together. Say, hey, let's do a little bit of an exploration of a passage where someone who's struggling with what you're struggling with met with God and got some help. And let's see what we can learn from that story and how it connects to your story. So I might do that. I might walk through a passage with somebody. One of my favorite ones, I mean, obviously you've got different passages for different kinds of issues. One of the ones around shame that I really love is the story of Hagar. I mean, she is just treated so badly by Abraham and Sarah. She's just treated like she's dirt. She doesn't respond perfectly to that herself. So it's a very real passage. Hey, we get sinned against. We sin in response. It's a big mess. She leaves the camp. She thinks she might die. And then God rocks up. And although she might have been invisible to Abraham and Sarah, she wasn't invisible to God. God saw her. And she actually gives the name of the place a Hebrew name, which means, I've seen the God who sees me. So what I might do with someone who's feeling ashamed, they're feeling worthless, they're feeling like people just ignore them, they feel invisible, I might just kind of walk through that passage with them and stop and ask questions. How do you think Hagar felt over here? When she had to sleep with Abraham, how do you think she felt? I mean, what a terrible thing. When she was in the kind of wilderness on her own with her son, how do you think, what was going on in her head, do you think? And what you're doing is you're helping them see the struggles I have are struggles that people in the Bible have had. And the God that met with them is the God who can meet with me. So I might want to do that, just kind of weave a biblical story that connects with their story. But what I'm doing all the time is I'm kind of personalizing it for them. We're asking questions of Hagar, and then I'm asking them questions. And I'm helping them see how the kind of dots connect in that sense. Of course, you can do it more simply. I think earlier on I mentioned, for someone who's feeling very isolated, just a paraphrase from Psalm 34 could be of comfort to them. So there's lots of ways to do it, but the goal here is really to try and connect truth to life. You've done the hard work of understanding life. You've understood their heart. You've understood their need. What you want to do is find a passage that provides what they need at that moment. So the challenge is you need to know the person very well, and you need to know the Bible very well. Because unlike preaching, this is a little bit more spontaneous. And so the more familiar you are with your Bible, the more flexibility and spontaneity can actually happen in your counseling. Does that make sense? Because you're not preparing it in the way you're preparing a sermon.
I find trying not to have the whole conversation in one
Yeah.
thing, connecting with person again,
Mm.
you're discerning things like a week later or sometimes on the day that you're meeting with somebody. What's at the back and you just feel like the Spirit nudging something in the moment. You're like,
Yeah.
what am I going to say now?
Yeah.
God reveal something later on.
Yeah.
Right there.
Yeah, that's a great point. We don't need to say everything about everything in a session or a meeting. We can be patient. And even sometimes, it may take most of the time you have just to get to the point where you've understood them, and then you think, actually, maybe this passage will connect with them. You might just want to bring that up next week. Or you could say, hey, let's spend a couple of minutes looking at this, but why don't you go home and read it a few times and think about how it connects with you. And then next time we meet, we'll pick it up from there. So, yeah, I'm not in a rush to try and get everything done too quickly. I don't think people change that way anyways. So. Oh, yeah, it can differ. We tend to try and be, not rush things, but because we believe that discipleship should play a big role in people's sanctification, our counseling, we want to try and identify what the goals for counseling will be. And sometimes after a first session with someone, I might say, hey, we'll discuss the goals. I'm not talking about goals so much today because this is maybe more informal kind of thing. But I might identify goals and say, hey, why don't we set 5 sessions up, see how much progress we make towards our goals in 5 sessions. If we need more time after that, we can review it. But if after 5 sessions we feel like actually you've been helped, you've been a bit equipped for the way forward, and you know how to take the next steps, then we'll wrap it up after 5 sessions or whatever. So I'd rather actually have some good, solid consistency, make some progress, and actually release them than have an open-ended thing. They forget their appointment, they're not doing their homework. I'd rather have kind of something that's more engaging, help them make some progress, and then review whether they need to keep going.
First part of our conversation, often when I put messaging, I say, hey, let's grab coffee. Okay.
Yeah.
What's in that box?
Yeah.
I went from
Yeah.
through to say like, hey, just give me the headline so I can prepare. Another little thing like, I can't do something briefing next week. Another
Yeah.
time it's like, I want to share something with you.
Yeah.
So how do you set up those parameters? This isn't a year-long counseling journey.
Yeah.
Like, where in that conversation have several things that share something deep,
Mm.
personal, like you towards the end of that conversation go, hey, let's meet very specific, like 3 more times, or you say, hey, just a couple more times because this morning, and each time you review it.
Yeah. My downfall has been not being specific enough. So I'm working harder at getting more specific. What's helpful is identifying goals. So I think once they've kind of shared the thing, it can be good to say, okay, essentially you need to transition it. Is this a kind of a relationship where we're kind of chatting and it's a kind of discipleship thing? Are you looking for specific help in overcoming this struggle? If so, let's try and conceptualize the goals, and let's give it, I would say generally it's helpful to say, let's give it 5 sessions and then review it. Now, you may need much longer than that, but what it does is it can help the person go, okay, here's the goal, here's my kind of next steps, I need to get on this and be proactive about dealing with it. And a lot can actually happen, in 5 sessions. And also, I think it's better to have 5 good sessions and then take a break rather than have an open-ended thing that kind of is potentially infinite, but it also doesn't really have a lot of momentum. People forget about it. They don't do what you've asked them to do. So kind of limiting it, I would say, err towards that side. And you can always extend it if you want to.
What about, let's say we're to plant a church, some volunteers, for instance, for Sundays, whatever. There's so much.
Yeah, there's a lot to do.
How do you as well?
Yeah. So I think probably for a lot of you guys, where you'll end up being in a very significant kind of leadership role, you're doing a lot. It's probably what we were talking about earlier, that you may have a good initial conversation and then need to refer them on to someone who can take it forward. Every now and then, if you have capacity, it's good to walk with someone and try and do 5 sessions with someone. It'll really stretch you. It'll benefit you. But probably for a lot of you guys, that's going to be harder to do for more than one person.
Just a question, because like Anson, when you were speaking, you said, okay, let's meet for coffee. And I don't know, for me, I've always found, okay, let's do your counseling in a place which is comfortable for me, a little defeatist,
Mm.
Is it always better to say, okay, where would you like to meet? Because just even culturally, black people don't do coffee, right? We hate the stuff. So it's just it's a thing like it's almost like come and we meet on my terms. Is it always okay? I guess it's more for context. It's like it's always better to say, okay, where would you like to meet? Because it's a bit more where they're comfortable. It's easier to disarm them.
Yeah. I think it goes down to that thing of really knowing this person, loving them, trying to appropriately engage with them. Once things become more formal, I will usually suggest, I always do suggest, we meet somewhere private. Sometimes at a coffee shop, you're just aware of how, So, and also if I want to pray for the person, which I probably do want to do, a coffee shop's also not the best place for that. You can, but... Okay, let me just move on to fruit because we're running out of time. So you're, sorry, question?
On which stage do you say this is a referral situation? Because I've been in a stage where I feel like go to the pastoral, this person can be ahead, but sometimes I feel like there must be someone who stage when you're in the same levels.
Yeah, I think if you're struggling to conceptualize the goals, so you've kind of spent time listening to them and hearing them out, but you're struggling to think where to take it, I would say then the need for referral becomes more clear. So I would say if I feel like I don't know how to best help this person, even though I've spent some time listening to them and being diligent and all that stuff, then probably I'm going to want to refer this on. So I would say you always want to kind of hear them out and actually know what is the situation. So I don't want to just have this automatic referral thing where but having listened to them, having understood the situation as best we can, if we still feel ill-equipped or unsure, then I'd say, I'm not sure I'm the best person to help you right now. But I've got someone who can. Okay, so we want to know the heat, we want to understand the heart, we want to speak gospel truth, and remember, not a monologue, but a dialogue. And then finally, we want to collaborate with them on applying truth to life so that they actually bear fruit. We actually want, we want heart change, but we want that heart change to result in tangible change. We want them to actually live a new kind of fruitful life. And so the things here to kind of consider are identifying action steps that are relevant to that stage of growth. So for example, the action steps will differ as the person makes progress, but maybe the first thing is they come to you, they're absolutely heartbroken, but they haven't told God how they're feeling. Action step, lament. Pour out your heart to God. You can do that with them. You can even maybe suggest that they read a psalm of lament for like homework, and they personalize it. So I've sometimes done that with someone I've realized they don't know how to lament. We'll do a little bit of it together, and then I'll give them a psalm to read for homework. For a week, they'll do that. The next week, we'll discuss it. As they become more familiar with it, I'll say, okay, now that you've understood the psalm, I'd like you to write your version of it. So that may take like a couple of weeks, but I'm not in a rush. But what's going to happen after a few weeks is that they're going to learn how to pour out their heart to God. They're going to learn how to use the Psalms to express their prayers and their hurts. Those action steps will change as things go along. So the thing to think about is, what does godly fruit look like? What does a godly response look like at this stage? What do they need to do next? And the second point here is, we just want to do that collaboratively. I don't want to just tell the person what to do. Especially what tends to happen is things we find personally helpful, we tend to tell other people to do those things. Just like, I read this book by Tim Keller, you should definitely read it, it'll sort out all your problems. They don't like reading. So now, the Tim Keller books are long. So you give them a Tim Keller book to read, they don't like reading, they see you 2 weeks' time, they haven't read it, they feel bad. Try and think with them about what they need to do and what will suit them. Maybe they prefer to listen to something. Maybe there's a particular song that connects with their struggle. You can be quite creative. You want to just make sure it's well suited to their need. It's easy to ignore this one, but I've found that it's very important. One of the things we see often in the New Testament is this put off, put on dynamic. Put off lying, speak the truth. Put off this, put on that. So we want to think about the fact that they're not just putting off thorns, they need to put on fruit. And as the shepherd in the relationship, I want to be guiding them towards being fruitful for God. And I just want to, again, I'm not going to tell them what to do, I'm not going to be overly prescriptive, but I'm going to want to help them think about some next steps that they need to take. Maybe it is listen to a sermon, but maybe it's like join a life group. Maybe that's what they need to do. Maybe they've, as you've discussed, you've had a conversation, they've realized, hey, I'm a little bit isolated. Maybe the thing I need to do is join a life group. So in the next week, I'm going to go visit 2 life groups and see which one I connect with. So that's the final thing here, is just saying we want to take the insights, we've shared the gospel with them, we've reminded them of Christ and his love for them, we've empathized with them. We want to then help them say, okay, what is it that God's calling you to right now? What's the next thing you need to do to make progress? And that's it.